All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the presentation today to talk about should you automate or should you not automate. Because you're at the show, you probably know the answer to the question. Of course, eventually everybody is going to automate. That's, it's like eventually everybody's going to use a smartphone and everybody's going to have a self-driving car. Otherwise, how do you get back from the bar, right? So the key objectives here, one of them is what's driving the demand. Talk a little bit about that and some of the factors that are happening over the next several years. Another one is what is automation, the types of things we're talking about here. You'll see a lot of it out on the floor, but talk about the applications. How do you do a justification for the automation, and when should automation be implemented? So, look, I'm Nate Rozier, managing partner in Invista, where our booth is right there. And we help companies with the justifications. We also do the design and implementation of a lot of the stuff out here. We're partners with probably a third of all the companies that are here, and we've got several hundred implementations. A lot of lessons learned from that. Automation is like anything else, pros and cons to everything, but at some point, it just makes great sense. And we think about what's been happening. The e-commerce, obviously COVID kind of blew it up quite a bit, but most of the consumer side of the business is multi-channel. And if anybody who's been at Walmart trying to maneuver around those carts of people picking stuff out of there, right, like I have, which is extremely annoying, you realize, the fulfillment and the way consumers receive products has changed quite a bit. It's not going back anytime soon, which creates a lot of complexity. So that's sort of one piece. The other thing that is interesting, because we have 1,000 clients, and I will tell you, all of them in consumer space run into the same thing. I call it the Amazon effect. They sell a lot of SKUs, lots and lots of SKUs. In fact, they probably sell 3 times as many SKUs as they probably should, right? Like everybody else, they make money on the top third, and the rest of it's they're just to get the customers to show up. So it's a lot of SKUs, and if you take a look at the complexity of omnichannel, plus the reverse logistics, plus all the SKU proliferation, huge challenges. And then there's costs. Now I'll tell you, there's a number of things that are happening on the cost side. One of them is it's not just labor, it's not just land, it's not just the cost of capital, interest rates, building materials, right? Like there's a huge headwinds in cost, which also will not reverse. So you combine all those things together, you can kind of see it's an ongoing, neither of these factors are going to reverse. In fact, mostly will get worse over time. All those things are driving really the desire to move to automation and build the business case. The e-commerce is interesting. I started working in e-commerce in '98, and we ran the math back then and realized, it was only appropriate for 15% of the market. And of course, as we look forward 30 years from then or 25 years, we realize it's about 15% of the market. But still, it's expensive. It's hard to do. There's a lot of cost built into it with reverse logistics. But anytime you're trying to get eaches or small unit size things out to customers, that handling always drives a great help for automation. Not just that, but it's a big driver. The other thing to kind of keep in mind, not just from the e-commerce side, is really the cost of space. I'll tell you, one of the things that's, I don't have the graph up here because I'm not sure I know who put the graph together. But basically, they're not building as many warehouses. The warehouse building rate in 25 and 26 are about half of what it was in 2018 and 2019. There's just not as many warehouses being built. One is cost. The second one is cost of capital. And the third one is just kind of the overbuild that was done around COVID. Now, right now, warehouse space isn't too bad because, there's a balance of supply-demand. But remember, it takes 2 years to get a building up and get it all in. So we take a look at 2027, 2028, those real estate costs are going to be a lot higher than they are now, just because of the constraint in the capacity that's out there. So that's an important piece. So another thing that everybody knows is warehouse cost, on the cost on the labor side. I think what's usually much worse is really the availability. It's hard to find enough people to work in a warehouse at a high quality to get good fulfillment. And I'll tell you, everybody has this problem. We work with a lot of 3PLs, and the 3PLs have just a bigger problem, if not worse, right, than the companies who run their own distribution. And so we've run into a lot of situations where we have a lot of companies using 3PLs, and they want to get out of that 3PL because they cannot get the service levels and qualities that they want, right? And so if you think about how am I going to get 100 people picking over 2 or 3 shifts in rural Ohio, well, it's not going to happen. You're not going to find them. Doesn't matter what you pay, right? So, at some point, you start running out of enough demographics to really support what's going on and pull that talent in. So, I think everybody also knows, right, that a lot of manufacturing is moving back to the United States. I can tell you, I'm part of helping clients, right, start up factories, and driving through the Midwest now, it's the opposite of the Rust Belt, right? There are construction cranes and stuff everywhere, building up all kinds of a factory and assembly, battery, steel mills, everything, right? What do you think they pay? They pay pretty good, right? They're going to compete for the same type of labor. So labor availability is something that is going to be very constrained for quite some time. I don't ever see that reversing. But when you think about what's the best place to put a warehouse, labor availability is one factor. You got a lot of other factors, right? Between transportation, which ports do I want to use, the real estate costs, the taxes, other things that you're trying to incorporate. But trying to find a place like that that's got enough labor over the course of that building's life, it's going to be extremely difficult. So that's going to be a big driver of automation, is just supporting the facilities with the variable comp and costs that you can over time. So what does this mean? Well, every time we take a look at this, the number one investment that most companies are considering in distribution and supply chain is automation. There's a number of reasons for it. A lot of times, the automation will do a number of things. One is it can sometimes take the complexity out of the warehouse operations. So you think about a warehouse where I've got multiple channels going on. I've got reverse logistics going on inside of that. Maybe I've got 50,000 SKUs or 80,000 SKUs. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out, well, how am I going to manage all this complexity in my systems, right? Huge issue. Our many systems are really good at managing all that complexity, orchestrating the labor, making sure everything's efficient, making sure I've got visibility of which zones are working, how many people are there, trying to organize, my day so I hit my on time in full. What happens is if I can get some automation, I could take some of that complexity, maybe the more complex picking operations or put away operations, or maybe I've got some slow movers, medium movers, small parts, things like that are labor intense, system complex, right? Put that in some automation. Then what I can do is therefore, the rest of my systems can focus on the other parts of the operation, right? And that way, I'm chasing fewer bodies around, but I'm also taking a lot of complexity out of the systems. So that, in addition to, the other factors we talked about in terms of cost, capability, all that are huge drivers of the desire to automate. I can tell you, right, we work in the space with a large number of clients, and they're all looking at this. Even smaller companies of the size that you wouldn't expect, because if you're going to make an investment in a warehouse, you're already putting down millions of dollars, right? So investing in automation either today or in the future makes perfect sense because, getting to my point, you're going to do it someday. So what is automation? So warehouse automation is fascinating. We're in a place where we're close to a disruptive effect. If everybody remembers Moore's law, eventually the computer chips get good enough where you're going from playing, basic computer games to selling stuff online, right? At some point, the technology and the cost gets to a magical place where you need to do it. It makes perfect sense. And depending on the operation, it makes perfect sense to do that. There's a number of reasons why. So basically, there's a variety of things you do with automation. One is you reduce travel time, right? So one of the things that happens is, most of the labor cost you have are people walking around the warehouse. That's the number one cost you have. So look, between conveyors, shuttle systems, AMRs, all that stuff, you can take 60, 70% of that travel away. Just eliminate that as a cost. So we see a lot of that into some of the high-rise shuttle systems. You can see it a lot in the all these pieces out here where they're basically moving the product from zone to zone. The pickers stay in one place, they pick it, and then they put it, and then all that travel is taken by something else. You also see, like right here in the middle, the goods-to-person systems, right? So goods-to-person systems are fantastic because you get a lot of SKUs in one place. If you've got more than 10,000 SKUs in a warehouse, you should strongly consider it, right? If you have smaller things that fit into those totes, there's no way to get more product in a place than using a goods-to-person system like that. And then, the presentation rates, again, those people aren't walking. There's no travel. They just stand there. All the product is brought to them. And then, they can grab the product 400 to 600 times an hour. So you're talking about, tremendous productivity. But what you also get is, just think about it, I added a lot of density to the warehouse. I compressed my warehouse. And every time you compress your operation, you reduce travel for everybody else. Because other people are going to be walking, not, right? If you put in a goods person, other people are still walking around. Well, once I've compressed the warehouse, then I've reduced the travel for all the other people as well, right? So those are really good systems to operate. Obviously, there's a lot of robotic arms. You'll see that where you're depalletizing, palletizing. Huge benefits, not just from a labor side, but also from a safety standpoint. And that's very common. We see a lot of those. And then there are things that are just a little more complex with the AMRs. Robots that follow you. We'll talk a little more about that. And what's good about those is the type of investment and how you put product, rearrange your warehouse. With today's automation, it's not just cost effective from a labor and cost standpoint, but it's also flexible, right? That's the main reason to take a look at it. It's not I put it in and it's there forever. I don't know if anybody's ever put in a large-scale sortation system like a shoe sort or something like that. It's there. When you put it in, it's there, and you're not going to do much with it for about 15 years because it costs too much to do anything to it, right? These new automation systems are very flexible, and you can add to them. You can see the kind of the system on the far left there with that type of automation. You see it's very dense, but you can just keep adding modules to it and expand it over time. So you can start with a small footprint and keep expanding it very easily, very modular. Software is extensible that way, and all the technology works. You also have situations where you got the fork, automated fork trucks that move product around. You can just put them in your warehouse today, right? You don't have to do anything special with it. They just, you can see a lot of the technology out here where I have a case picking operation and I'm trying to just do standard case picking, and I want to reduce my travel and I want to come up with something that's more efficient. Well, those are great because you just put them right in the warehouse as it's set up. Once you have the configuration, I can always change that configuration and adapt it over time, right? So those are good. Lower investment, very productive. Obviously, when you get into the robotic arms, things like that, it's there. Once you put it in, it's not moving anytime soon, but you can move them around the warehouse. They are more flexible than some of the technologies that have been around in the past. And then you get to the ASRSs and the other, I would call them hardcore automation. That's old school. Once it's in, right? It's not really very flexible from that standpoint, but there are a lot of applications for it and a lot of interesting business cases you can build around that. So So as we think about automation and how we can apply them, you got a number of options. You can have, robots deliver to the person, like goods to person system or shuttle systems that are presenting it to you, and you could take it and put it into a shipping container, put it on a conveyor, and off it goes. Very efficient, very quick. You have mobile robots, AMRs, that may follow you around. So you can do a case pick. You can go and just like you walk down the aisle, go out, grab it, put it onto the pallet. The robot just kind of follows me around and takes it from zone to zone. So instead of, you think about some of the case pick operations you have, there's lots and lots of travel, right? I mean, my pick density, the number of picks I have per linear foot is typically very low in those environments. I may have a long travel time where those things will cut a lot of that, again, travel time off. Usually you can cut it in half in a case pick operation, which is a tremendous amount of cost and challenge to manage. You can have person to goods. That's one of those where there's a lot of flexibility where you can ride on the AMRs, or the AMRs kind of go from zone to zone. Those are relatively efficient, a little more sophisticated. They work better on the higher volume operations because I may have a combination of where I'm bringing the AMRs to the people working in a zone, and other situations where somebody will go with the AMR, right? You may do a hybrid that way. And then you kind of have the goods to robot. From that standpoint, you got a number of situations, with the robotic arms obviously work really well. And then you also have situations where I may doing some certain type of cart picking, and as a kind of a pick, it'll help me do a put. And I'll give you an example of that here in a little bit. But what's interesting is you can do all of these in one operation and use the same software to control all of it, right? I mean, what's one of the cool things about Automation Day is it's very flexible, and you can add and pick and choose the pieces you want to add over time, which is why it makes sense to do it, right? Because you're not stuck with one particular type of situation. So as we get into a little more detail, these goods to as you get to the goods and person system, there's a couple different examples here. As they're sort of brought out, one of the things that's interesting is, one, you get a lot of SKUs in a very dense area. Pros and cons, right? If it's a very high volume sort of items, a lot of times you won't put them into a goods to person system because you'll overwhelm it, right? A lot of those, sometimes there's a certain number of picks per hour, picks per day. You want to kind of keep that offline, right? To kind of take some of that volume off. But the B's and C's you have are perfect. And if there's small items that fit into those totes, there's nothing more efficient than that. And we have operations running where we're getting 600 to 700 an hour. People picking out of those. Again, it eliminates all the travel time. The quality levels are very high. You actually have lower turnover of people working in those positions because they're not running around with carts. It's an easier job. And the other thing that's helpful is, I kind of say it like this. If you ever, I don't know how many people have warehouses like this, but you run into warehouses where there's one area is always a bottleneck, right? And, maybe I've got high volume items, low volume items, large and small, but there's always one area that's kind of a bottleneck and slows the rest of the warehouse down. You think about how to make a warehouse productive. It's not just cutting people here, cutting people there. It's how do I make the whole warehouse faster? How do I make that entire volume go faster through it? And if you target something like this, typically picking lots of SKUs as smaller items is a bottleneck, right? And this is the turbocharger, right? This will speed the whole operation up because this is a bottleneck area, you put one of these things in, next thing you know, the entire warehouse runs faster. Nobody's waiting for them, right? They'll be pushing the rest of the system, which is kind of the way you want to think about your warehouse anyway. How do I push it and get it going? Amazing for that. So you got a number of options with the AMRs. You got some that will follow you around, for you doing car picking and other things. Again, you still have some travel time, but a lot of times it can follow you around in a zone and then when you're done picking in that zone, it will then go off to another zone. So if you have your zones kind of spread out a lot and you have a lot of cart picking, it's amazing for those operations. And if you have some that the bots will just follow just a dedicated path, it just goes down there and just people stay in their zone and just kind of put them onto the AMR. And then you have this situation, which is very interesting. If you have we have a few clients with, you get 1 million square feet and all these different pick zones with completely different size items, things like that, relatively complex operation. Those are great because there would normally be a lot of travel time, but what those bots do is they just go from zone to zone and do the pick. They kind of handle all that complexity of how do I pull from all these zones and merge them together into an order, right? It's always a fun, complex thing. If you have a area in the, in front of the dock where people are trying to consolidate orders and put stuff down from all these zones, you want to make it easier? Do that. You eliminate all that, most of that labor up on that end. So we see those happen quite a bit. A lot of interesting technologies coming out with AGVs and arms going out and actually picking, cases and other items, depending on what the case is and what the items are. The technology gets better and better from that standpoint of robots moving out into those areas. We see these working quite a bit. Again, you get a little bit lower volume items, and it's got to fit the profile that the robots work really well with. We see this in automotive and also in food manufacturing. And then there's the variety of other things that work. I'll give you an example of it, but sometimes, you think about the put to store locations or other things you might do, or I'm picking, but then, I grab a case and I'm splitting it up and putting it to others. There's a number of interesting robotics situations where, we're bringing up, larger quantities and they're being distributed across a variety of orders or for store fulfillment or whatever that might be. So that technology is out there now, and it's getting pretty good. And folks are doing a lot of store fulfillment, or they're moving a lot of volume of items distributed across a number of orders. That always works really well. But we see more limited applications here. Retail is obviously a good one, but there are others that are a little more, from a cost standpoint, they're just a little more. There's usually not as much labor in that area to kind of reduce to get a better business case, but we do see them in certain applications, okay? So I thought I'd talk a little bit about a case study, give an example of some of these situations where we run into it, automation. So I was just going to give an example of, this is about 750,000 square feet, and they've got a variety of items. They have apparel, they got some hard goods, there's some footwear. It's just a wide variety of things. Some of it's big and heavy. And it's a pretty large operation, seasonal. They got items where it's moving crazy fast during the peak season, then slows down. Hard to find labor in the area, and it's also very difficult to staff during peak because it's the same peak that a lot of other companies have, so you're fighting for the same labor. They've got some conveyor already in place, some different pick lines that they've been using, very labor intensive, decent units per hour, but they end up with a number of issues. So, they're using the old school tilt tray. Anybody ever worked with a tilt tray? I mean, it's all about how fast you can make that thing work, which means everybody in the warehouse is trying to figure out how fast to make that thing work, which isn't necessarily good for the warehouse. It's just good for the tilt tray. And then it creates certain capacity situations because they're picking in a lot of different zones, trying to feed the chutes. Of course, when you're feeding a tilt tray, you got, a lot of times you bring a whole case up and you try to feed it into the system, and then, if a case holds 12, you need 10, then I got 2 residuals, I got to figure out how to put them back. I mean, I'm sure you all have seen those situations. In a seasonal item, type of business like this, you always got sliding issues because every season is slightly different, and what's an A mover this season is different than next season. It's hard to have kind of a just dynamic because then I'm constantly moving product around. It's very labor intensive, and it's sort of outdated. I mean, there's a lot of this old school technology. It's held together by parts with eBay. In fact, I have a number of clients that keep their old school conveyor and shoots like this by finding parts on eBay to keep them going, right? So that's what this example is. So what's interesting here is instead of the tilt tray, we're looking at putting in a pocket sorter. Now the pocket sorter there is really goods to robot. It's sort of a put to store, a little more automated from that perspective. You could see a number of ways where this would help them quite a bit. One is obviously the volume goes way up, right? So instead of the entire warehouse trying to make that sorter operate, basically you can be much more flexible because you can go as fast or slow as you want with the pocket sorter, right? That type of automation it's not a continuous speed. It will speed up or slow down depending on what you need it to do. You can see we can do 3,000 presentations an hour with this particular type of thing. You can see the number of SKUs we can hold, right? It's very dense. Storage and throughput from that standpoint. It's also more efficient with the dunnage. You don't have extra totes and boxes. What do you do with all that? You kind of reuse most of the dunnage that you have. And it also works really well with the auto bagger. So when you put in stuff like that, you get a number of opportunities. One of them is density, right? So we did a couple things. We did a shuttle here, right? And the pocket sorter here freed up a lot of space for storage or whatever you might need, or for future growth. So has anybody ever done a network study to take a look at where they should put their product in their network, right? So when you do those studies, a lot of times they'll tell you, hey, look, you should put more of your product into this DC than you have today. But you can't. Why? Because it's already full. There's no more space. Well, how am I going to make space? It's a building, big walls, very expensive. Here's how you make space, right? You put in the automation, it gives me two things. One, it gives me more space to store things. I can add more SKUs, because remember how dense it is. I can put 40, 50,000 SKUs in some of these things. And then the other thing is I sped up my throughput of the operation. So if you're ever doing a network study, taking a look at where I should put product, and I'm in a constrained environment where I can't expand the DC, it's hard to invest in it. When you put these types of things in, you can get more SKUs, more capacity, more throughput, just like that. In most environments, this is a good example, in most environments, you also get a great business case, right? So it makes perfect sense to do that. So what was interesting here is we put a lot of the high dense items that would fit into the shuttle here. That one holds about 15 to 20,000 SKUs, depending on seasonality. Then I have a pocket sorter here, which replaced the sorter that we had before. That pocket sorter then basically is about twice the capacity of what the old tilt tray sorter had, right? The other thing to keep in mind, those old school sorters, they got a lot of moving parts that wear out pretty fast. These, if you've seen these type of automation, right? It's like a Roomba, right? It's just motors and little wheels. Very easy. You don't have to tune it. You don't have to worry about all these big chains and things. So we really help their maintenance on that side. So we in this particular operation, again, it was around a little over 700,000 square feet. When we put this in, we freed up about 50,000 square feet. We added 170,000 locations we opened up that we could put different product in, right? We added a lot of density. And they sell a lot of small things, right? And apparel, mixed SKU things. So they helped quite a bit. And then with 5 people, we could pick 3,000 units an hour, right? Remember, we pretty much eliminated almost all the travel time. So huge benefits in this top operation. Pocket sorter is an interesting device where it's basically bringing around pockets, right, to people so they could do consolidation. It's kind of a put to store. So I have my items, and as I kind of scan, this is the item I have. Maybe I have a case of it. Then it's gonna present to me, you know, my location, you know, the location I'm going to put them into the orders. So it basically sets me up to just either do a put to store or put the location, and then it'll take it on to different people, and then once it's completed, it's taken to the packing, right? So it basically, in a very small, dense space, it does pretty much what the tilt tray used to do, just faster, more efficient, and better. You know, the induct station, you know, you can kind of feed it faster or slower. It's not as challenging and kind of mad to deal with. And also, it can store residuals for you, right? I mean, that's one of the best things about it. It'll maintain that residual for maybe the next day or the next wave that comes through. So there's a huge benefit to that standpoint. It holds about 30,000 cartons, and you can knock out about 10,000 SKUs in a shift, okay? And then the shuttle system that we put in, right? You can see that. You see it runs about the same speed, about 3,000 an hour. So we're trying to synchronize the operations. When we put in multiple pieces of operation, we said, well, this is the rate throughput we want to have. Again, you could always up that. You can always add more modules and increase it. But what's really good about, you know, think about what the tilt tray is. Once you put it in, that's it, and it ain't changing, right? So the way we have the shuttle system here, and then the pocket sorter, we had those built at the same capacity, but both of them could expand capacity. They could both expand rate, right? You could do it at the same time or at different times, depending on how you want to do it. But essentially, it dramatically improved the operation from that standpoint and productivity. You know, 600 units per hour, not too shabby. And it's also good, you know, for either eaches or batches. So look, when you think about it, I'm just giving you a case study here as it's an example. There are lots of them, right? You know, we reduced a lot of fork trucks, we reduced a lot of travel, a lot of FTEs. Makes sense. But you have to think about it in general as this is an investment that the company's going to make. Your company is going to make an investment into your automation. When you go into a warehouse, you're going to spend a bunch of money anyway. You're going to spend the money. So if you're going to spend the money, how do you want to spend that money? And so when you take a look at automation, it does a number of things. It does expand your capacity. It does reduce that labor content. But the other thing it does is it also, you know, in every situation we put these in, the quality level, service level actually goes up. The other thing to always think about is, remember the Amazon effect, all these SKUs. Inside of your supply chain network, everybody has got a bunch of extra SKUs. They don't know where to put. That's just how it works. Some of them move fast, some of them don't move so fast, but you know, there's a lot of different models on the multi-echelon or hub and spoke model. You know, how do we leverage that? So we have a number of clients that had what I call a flat network, right? They just had 10 RDCs, and each RDC had their region they sold into, and each RDC held about 40,000 SKUs. Okay, the company sold 120,000 SKUs. But each RDC only held 40,000. So where are the other SKUs at? Well, either shipped direct from vendor, or actually that was it. They just shipped direct from vendor, which, as you know, is expensive and low service level. She said, hey, look, what if we gave you one consolidated DC in the middle of the country that held an extra 50,000 SKUs? Well, sure enough, we ran that model, and it improved the service level. I mean, instead of like a week lead time, it was a day lead time, a day and a half lead time. Their service level went from about 91 on vendor delivered to, once we brought them in there, it was at 99.5, right? So that gave them a huge competitive advantage. By the way, it took a lot of market share from their competitors when they did that. But that consolidation of the SKUs in that gave them more service level. Use automation, it didn't cost more, right? The cost went way down compared to having the vendor pick it and ship it direct to the store. So in that situation, it was a strategic move for them. They needed the space anyway. They needed DC, but by consolidating some of these slower mover SKUs and putting them in there, they saved money, they improved their competitive situation, right? So you kind of have to think about this a little bit strategically. You're going to do it anyway, right? Because it's going to be hard to find people to work in a warehouse. But when I do it, how do I create a competitive advantage with it? So in this case, obviously, we kind of talked about this. Maintenance, one thing to keep in mind, these new robots, much lower maintenance than the old school conveyor, tilt trays, things like that. The other thing is the control systems. So, the control systems that manage these robotics are relatively sophisticated, and they can control a lot of operations inside the warehouse. So you have a complex type of operation. Like I said, maybe it's picking a lot of different zones and consolidating them to that software will manage all of that. They have great software systems we work with that not just control the robots and work directly to the PLCs and the conveyors and connect everything together, but they also orchestrate the warehouse operations. So you think about that, what did we just say? Well, we've actually kind of reduced the need for, the warehouse management system to be able to handle all that, or whatever the system you might have. So that's another huge benefit. You use software anyway, it's a lot cheaper than warehouse management system, and since that's connected, if you can leverage that capability, it's very helpful. So we sort of talked about how these things work. Why are my clients moving forward with automation? There are always cost justification. I think one of the things they're thinking about is when they invest into their supply chain network, what ways do they want to invest? And if you were to compare, variety of things, material handling, rack, software, so on, automation always has got a better ROI. It's always a better investment to make than some of the other areas you can invest in your supply chain. And I'll tell you the other thing that's really hot is safety. If anybody's ever had, any type of safety issues inside of a warehouse, it's a pretty big deal and challenging, and there's certain industries where it's extremely important that they have a focus on that. And so they're automating a lot of areas where they've had risk or challenges in the past. So we do see that. The thing that's interesting about automation to me is that you have a lot of options, and it's very flexible. You could change it over time. What you put in a warehouse, maybe you use that for 3 years, maybe you use it for 5 years, and then you could change it. So when you design, you're always sort of designing some flexibility you're going to add to over time, or maybe take away or adjust it. And you kind of want to build that together. The thing is, you always want to think about with the automation is, how do I combine different systems to help me? So you got to be real careful trying to get one system to do everything magically inside of the warehouse, because it doesn't work. Then you just created a customized system you'll never maintain. So one of the things you really want to do is figure out, well, how do I use the right combination of systems so I'm not overburdening anything in particular, and make it easy to maintain and upgrade over time. That's another thing that's very important to do that. The other thing that's important is think about the associates. These places that have more robotics, they have lower turnover. I don't know what the morale is, all of them. I haven't surveyed them, but they just have lower turnover in these areas. Part of it is some of the more difficult tasks of handling and moving things and travel, you're taking it away from them. So that way the turnover goes down, everybody knows, you reduce turnover in a warehouse, your quality goes up, productivity goes up. So a lot of soft costs in here that are very strong. And the other thing is, you want to think about it from a long-term investment standpoint. Warehouses are, they're 15 to 25-year investments. We build business cases, we build 7-year business cases, but no one stays 7 years, right? Most people are in a warehouse a long time. So you want to think about, how do I want to adapt it and change it over time? I will tell you that because I've been doing this for, 25 years or whatever. Whatever you think you're going to do in terms of your business, it's going to change over time. It's going to change. Whatever you're selling today is not going to be selling in 5 years. It's not, right? So how do I want to create something that's flexible to adapt, right? Don't design yourself into a corner. Make sure you have the ability to kind of change and adapt. That's my alarm. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Feel free. I'm relatively transparent. I'll tell you whatever I know. Any questions? Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, hey, how do you see a medium-sized enterprise, leveraging this automation? And I think this is a great example. So, I got a client, mid-sized client, 150,000 square foot warehouse, mostly case picking, right? And they were going to put in a tier one WMS system, right? Because they got to keep track of lots and code dates, things like that. And they were trying to pick across zones and pick a net. And what they did instead is they spent the same amount of money building those AMRs to follow you around to pick into that, reduce that travel time, got a more efficient system, did the same capability using the warehouse execution system that they would have done with their warehouse management. And they reduced their overall labor costs by about 24%. So again, now that's kind of a lower level automation where you got the robots kind of following you around. But from their perspective, it was worth it because they were having a hard time hiring people and bringing them into the area. So that's the kind of thing we see. Any other questions? Well, I hope everybody enjoys the show. If you have any questions, like I said, we're in Vista. We're right there. Come over and yell at us. We do have a robot over there. If you can beat it at tic-tac-toe, you win a prize. And the prize is buying me a beer.